Greetings. I am so happy tonight that we have Sam Pollard with us. And Sam, he's a producer, a director, an editor, and not only that, but you teach at NYU. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
What do you teach at NYU?
I teach filmmaking, man.
Yeah,
I
I
teach a
know.
class. I teach a class called the History of Editing. I
Oh,
teach a class on this semester. I'm teaching a class called the Language of Film.
hmm,
I teach production classes for senior students who are doing their senior thesis film. I
hmm.
teach a class called Sight and Sound Documentary for sophomores who are being introduced to the world of documentary filmmaking. Uh,
And
I've been doing it for
for normal human being, that would be enough. Yet you are constantly producing and directing, which is kind of amazing. So briefly, we only have a little bit of time, but how do you balance all this?
delicately and not a lot of sleep.
Yeah,
Not a
yeah,
lot of sleep. I'm a 6 hour sleeper.
yeah.
So I've done like about eight eight. How many, Danielle, have I done today? I think I've done 7 Zooms today.
You've done at least 7 for me,
Yeah,
for
7 for
sure.
her. Yeah, MLK. So
So yeah, go on. So tell me about how this film started. Was where did yeah.
MLK FBI was came from a book that was written by the historian David Garrett that looked at Dr. King being surveilled by J. Edgar Hoover and the
Right.
FBI. And my producer, Ben Hadeen, had read the book and he called me up and he said, Sam, we had already finished a film called Two Trains Running
Love that
about,
film.
about the
Love that
search.
film.
Thank you. About the search for Sunhouse and Skip James. And he said, I think we found our second film. So I read the book and I completely agreed with him. We reached out to David. We took an option on his book. Then we flew to Pittsburgh where he lives, brought a camera crew to his house and spent 4 hours with him, having him talk about the material in the book, the genesis of the book, King, Hoover, all the stuff that really became the frame for telling the story.
Mhm.
Then we put together a sizzle reel and we went out to beat the bushes to raise money because it was an independent documentary. And we got the same response from many people. Oh, this is a great story, great idea, but we don't have it we don't have money for it in this cycle. So that went on for about a year, 2018. And then 2019, beginning of 2019, 2 organizations came up with the funding, a company called Field of Vision, and another company called Play Action. They came with all the money, which enabled us to do the rest of our interviews. And we didn't have that many interviews to do. We interviewed Clarence Jones, Dr. King's attorney, Andy Young, one of his closest associates. We interviewed 2 former FBI agents, one gentleman named Chuck Knox, who's in Houston. And then James Comey came up. Ben suggested we interview James Comey, so he said yes. And then we interviewed 2 historians, a woman named Beverly Gage, who had done a book about Hoover and the FBI. So she was very knowledgeable about them. And the other historian was a professor named Donna Murch, who really knew about COINTELPRO, the organization
Yeah,
counterintelligence program started by Hoover
yeah.
in the late 50s, early 60s to infiltrate, and destroy any organization that was left of center, be it SCLC and Dr. King, be it Elijah Muhammad and Nation Islam and Malcolm X, be it Angela Davis or the Black Panther Party. And so those were this was rare for a documentary. Normally I interview 15, 20 people
Yeah.
for a documentary, and I usually end up with 10 or 12 in the final film. But
So
go ahead, I'm sorry.
that's all right. No, good. So one of the great things about this film is for all these great interviews you hear them as voice until the very end. You want to talk about
Absolutely.
the strategy of why you chose to do it that way? And it worked really well.
Well, I had seen a film in 2011 called The Black Power Mixtape, directed by the Swedish filmmaker named Goran. And what was so engaging about that film was that all the subjects were off camera. Angela Davis, Sonia Sanchez, Harry Belafonte, Cornel West. But I was very engaged in the material. I just was really absorbed in the footage. So I said to Ben, I want to try to do this film without anybody on camera. And we got some pushback from our funders initially. They were a little nervous about it. So that's why because initially we would just do audio. But when we got this pushback, we said, well, just to play it safe, we should shoot everybody on camera. And if they really have a problem with it as voiceover, we can always cut to them on camera. But luckily they didn't. And the idea of putting them on camera in the epilogue, quite honestly, was not my idea or Ben's idea. It was our editor, Laura Tomaselli, who did a fabulous job. And it really sort of gave you a sense of, okay, you've heard these people as voiceover, you've been engaged in all this material, but now they're going to be in person, which I think was very smart on our part.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me of, did you see the film Tower?
Sure, reminded me of Tower.
Right, and they did that at the end where you actually get to see the real
people.
people.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. That was a good film. Very good film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was odd that Field of Vision was one of the people who came through, because I've always seen them as doing short films. I don't really know them as doing features. Have they been doing that more now?
I guess. I mean, we were one of the first ones, I think, that they really put a lot of funding in, you know, and it was great for us that they were so supportive.
Yeah.
And they've been very supportive in Play Action and IFC, you know, and Cinetic. They've all been very supportive in helping this film really find an audience and getting it out to the public.
So a friend of mine, Yaki Smith, a really great filmmaker, I talked to him just before this, and he said, ask Sam if the family has seen the film and what the reaction to it was.
Well, I don't know if they've seen it because we didn't reach out to them, but we did receive some correspondence from one of their lawyers about the use of the material of King's speech and King's image. Yeah. And now we leave it to the lawyers. I'm not involved in that. Our lawyers and their lawyers will probably figure it out.
Yes, I know that some of that speech has always been difficult to use in a film.
Always. We fair used it.
Yeah, and fair use definitely changes the whole sort of context of that. So there's also some really great archival footage. And the archival footage, I mean, there's so much of things that we've seen before, but it seems much more vibrant. It's looked like you did a really good job of restoring the footage, making it look as crisp as it could, and to sort of, you know, one of the parts of this film that's really important is for people who didn't live through that era, the footage makes it seem like you're there.
Well, you know, I was amazed too at the quality of the March on Washington. I've seen that March on Washington footage many times. And I've never seen it look so pristine.
Well, it was shot in 35.
It was gorgeous. It was
James Blue, a Houston filmmaker, shot that.
Oh, he shot it. Oh, it's gorgeous. That's why it looks so good.
Do you know the story about that? That was made for the USIA.
Oh.
The government paid for it, but when it was made, Republicans didn't want it to be seen. So for many years, it could only be seen outside the United States.
Oh, I see.
And it took a long time for that to be sort of available. But yeah, you got a good copy of it, because I haven't seen it look that pristine.
I've never seen it look that good either. So it was shot 35. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, the footage is just, they're in the bus, they're everywhere.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's
I mean, it really sort of, and then, okay. So let's talk about, I know what to talk about. So we just had the Judas and the Black Messiah film, which I'm sure you've seen. And part of that film is very much about, you know, what's his name? The Messiah, I mean, the Judas.
William O'Neill.
Right, William O'Neill. And then you have a similar character in your film, who the photographer's name, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Ernest Withers.
Ernest. Right. And so there's a real kind of similar. Have people been talking about that and the difference between those two characters?
Well, just to give you an update, there's a fellow filmmaker of mine named Phil Bertelson, who's finishing up his own documentary about Ernest Withers. So I imagine there's going to be a deeper exploration into Withers being an informant for the FBI in that film. You know. And I mean, you know, it's a real sort of duality here. Here's Ernest Withers, who takes the picture of King and Abernathy after the Montgomery bus boycott. They win it on the bus. Here's the man who shoots the I Am a Man picture, you know, who shot many pictures for the SCLC and the Civil Rights Movement. And he turns out to be on the payroll of the FBI. You know, obviously they paid him some money. He needed some money and he took it, you know, not knowing what he was doing by informing on Dr. King. You know, and there was another gentleman who they mentioned in the film who worked in the SCLC office,
Yeah.
who was an informant. And that gentleman, so everyone knows, he's still alive and he lives in Atlanta.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Some of the stuff in the film, some of the scenes were just hard. Just it's just they're lost in memory. The idea, first of all, that Martin Luther King was not loved by all Americans. Like now, like there isn't a city in the United States that doesn't have an MLK Boulevard in it.
That's right.
And he is celebrated as an absolute hero. It was striking to me to remember, and I lived through this, and I should have remembered that there were people who, there was a long time when people really didn't like him.
Well, the thing I didn't remember, and I grew up in that period too, I didn't know that J. Glue was more popular when they took that poll in '64, that he was more popular than Dr. King,
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing about the world, how someone who was considered by many people at that time as a pariah, not those in the Black community, but in other communities, how nowadays he's looked upon as a god. I mean, I always compare this to, you remember, Bart, when Ali came out and refused to go into the service,
Yeah.
and he changed his name from Cassius Clay Muhammad
Kind of
Ali.
big deal.
He was a pariah.
Yeah.
He was denounced. He was
Draft
a pariah.
dodger.
Draft dodger. How dare he not want to join the armed services? And then 30 years later, he's considered an icon. You see him at the Olympics in Atlanta with shaking and everybody thinks of him as the icon. It's like people forgot that in 1964, 65, he was a pariah in this country. You couldn't give Ali away.
And like also in that the press, which we tend to think of as being somewhat enlightened, and like there were two things you feature in the film, when they're asking them, so why do blacks of all groups have problems? Like somebody asked that question, and then aren't you hurting your cause? I mean, the questions coming from the press just seem so, sorry about that, totally insane.
Yeah, but don't you think it's a reflection of what we've been hearing in the past year in America? Don't you think the Black Lives Matter movement are causing the riots in the cities?
Yeah.
And when Trump was on the stump, don't you think if you elect, remember this term here, Bart, if you elect these socialist Democrats, they will destroy our suburbs. I mean, the idea that anybody in 2020 would think that Joe Biden is a socialist Democrat is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Joe Biden?
Yeah, it's totally insane. So let me see, what else did I have here I wanted to ask you? So the film has been playing really, really well. Where do you
You can see it on all the streaming services. You can see it on YouTube. You can see it on Amazon. For $6 you can watch it. And it's been playing. People are enjoying watching it. And I'm glad. Here's a quick Raquel. Is it Raquel Chappelle?
Raquel.
Raquel. It was Gerald Clayton, a wonderful jazz musician who composed the score for MLK FBI. Did a wonderful job.
You did. It was terrific.
Yeah. I thought the soundtrack was really quite good, and again, the editing was really good. Now, you are both an editor and teach editor, a producer, director. What's it like to work with an editor when you are an editor? And is that awkward for the editor to know that different eyes are looking and than otherwise?
Well, the reality is I'm an old soul. I've been around a long time, and some of these young editors have are slightly intimidated because, oh my God, it's Sam Pollard. He cut for Spike Lee. He's been around, for a long time. Oh my God, how can I edit? My philosophy and attitude has always been, I'm looking to hire an editor who's not going to edit like me. I don't want somebody who can edit like me. If that's the case, I should sit and edit myself. I'm looking for someone who's going to bring their own imagination and creativity to the work, And I love the idea of coming into the editing room, looking at an editor's first cut and being surprised. Now I give them some parameters about why I think a sequence should be put together and where I think it should be going. But a good editor will take some of my ideas and make them even better. You know, sometimes they will make them better, but that doesn't bother me. I don't ever feel like, oh my God, if I don't sit there and edit, this won't be good. That's to me, it's silly. You know, the film medium, making films is a collaborative medium, and you need to be able to respect the people you work with. You know, because if you respect them and show them the kind of respect they deserve, they will go the extra mile to give you something better than you could have imagined. And that goes from cinematography to sound mixer to your editor to your post-production supervisor to your online color correction person, all of that.
And we've all seen people that are not that, and you know, people don't like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, some people get to their mind that, you know, one of the, to me, in my opinion, the worst director editor is the one who says, I'll hire an editor, but I also make my version of the film. Well, what's the point of hiring an editor? There's no point.
Yes, I know. I've heard that line.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to talk just a little bit about, I'm sure people are curious, editing for Spike. What was that like?
You know, 1988, Spike hired me. 1988, 89, he hired me to edit Mo Better Blues. And for the first 10 weeks, Bart, we would screen the dailies every night. And I would always ask him, I would turn to him at the end of the screen. I would say, so what do you want me to edit? He would say nothing. So by the end of 10 weeks on that first film, I was absolutely incensed. I was like, I've been completely disrespected. I've been editing for 15 years. This guy's not gonna let me edit. I'm never gonna edit for him again. All right? So the shoot's over. So I say, so Spike, you're gonna come in next week, we're gonna start editing? He says, no, I'm going on vacation for a week. Don't do anything. I'm boiling, Bart. I'm boiling and boiling. I'm about to explode. He comes in and he says, okay, let's watch all the dailies on scene one. And we watch all the dailies of every scene over the next 4 weeks. So we'd watch the dailies of a scene and he would say, go ahead and edit it. We'd watch the dailies of the next scene, go ahead and edit it. The reality was he didn't really know me as an editor. He heard about me, but he didn't know my work. So he wanted me to really understand his philosophy. So after I got to, you know, I'm bitching to this whole point that this will be my first and only Spike Lee film. This is what I said, Bart, nobody treats Sam Pollard like that. So I'm near the end of the edit. One day he walks with a script and he says, here, read this, man. I want you to edit this. It was Jungle Fever. So the rest is history.
Good story. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this, as an editor, and you've been editing a long time, how has editing changed from the days when you started, when we were editing like film, like really film, not just the technique, but how has the role of the editor sort of changed?
Well, you know, I started on the upright moviola back
Yeah.
in 1972.
I did as
73.
well.
Yeah. So then I went over to the Steenbeck.
Yeah.
And, you know, like a lot of editors from that generation, I was like, I have to touch the material. I have to touch the film. You know, you would put your film onto the rollers and the average. You'd cut the scene, you'd pull it down, you'd make a cut, you'd put your trims in the bend, and you'd have the assistant find the trims. And it was like, this is editing. And then I was going to say around 1988, 89, 18. Remember that? How old I am? 1988, 1989, someone said, well, we're doing this new thing now, offline editing. Remember the 3/4 inch tape?
Yeah, did that.
So I was doing the offline editing and I couldn't stand it because every time you had to make a change, you'd have to rebuild the whole sequence to get to the new cut. So that was frustrating. Then I was cutting on the Steenbeck and from Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Clockers. And then right around when I finished Clockers, Avid, I got a job cutting on an Avid. And then Four Little Girls came up and I edited that on an Avid. And initially someone interviewed me about what's the difference between editing digitally and editing on film. And I wrote, and I bitched about the fact that I can't touch it. But I'll be honest with you, man, digital editing is so much better than, you know, because I didn't have to worry about finding trims in the bottom of the barrel anymore. And the one advantage of editing digitally that could also be a downside. Is that, when you want to recut a sequence and do it a different way, in the old days with film, you'd have to either make dupes or have alternate takes to make another version of a sequence.
Mm.
With nonlinear technology, you could create a sequence, put it on the, put it onto your desktop or into one of your bins, and then recut it another way. The challenge is not to all of a sudden try to cut it 10 different ways. So I like the nonlinear technology. I didn't have to worry about trims.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed cutting on it. I've enjoyed it more and more. But I don't edit anymore. I stopped editing 4 or 5 years ago.
But it's also, in nonlinear, you can just try something without thinking twice. When you're editing film and you like choose to cut it, it says like, do I really want to do that? It may not work. And that's like 20 minutes just to cut it.
That's right.
Put it back.
It used to take about 15 minutes to make the cut because you worry about losing frames. No, I know that feeling.
So you want to talk a little bit about the other film, Black Art, The Absence of Light.
Yeah.
Which I think is just incredibly powerful, incredibly important, and talks about a whole different universe of art that has generally not been given the kind of due, and talks about this important exhibition. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about this film is, what is it that everybody in there has interesting looking glasses?
That's fascinating. You're right. They do.
Every single character has totally unique glasses.
Yeah.
Is this just African-American artists all have unique, interesting glasses?
I think it's part of that. I think it's part of their aesthetic. You're right. Amy Sherrill has interesting glasses. Jordan Castile does. The Astor Gates does. They all do. You're right. They all have, Faith Ringel has interesting glasses. They all do. That's a good point.
So how did that film come about?
Well, that one really was initiated by Henry Louis Gates Jr. He had went to HBO and had pitched the idea to one of the former executives about doing a documentary about Black artists.
Mm-hmm.
And then he brought in Thelma Golden, who runs the Studio Museum. And when I came on board, Skip and I initially thought the film should be framed around her 1994 exhibit, The Black Male, that was at the Whitney.
Mm.
And she didn't really like that idea. And she was the one who came with the suggestion we should build it around this exhibit that had been curated by the late David Driscoll called 2 Centuries of Black American Art.
Yeah.
So she gave me David's information. I reached out to David, and he had an apartment on 100th Street in Central Park West. And one night I went over to his house. We had a lovely, lovely dinner. We talked about the creation of the exhibit, the challenges he faced with the board of directors at the Los Angeles County Museum. And he agreed to be a part of the film. And that was in January 2019. And we said to him that we would come up to his summer house in Maine in July and sit down and do a long and extensive interview about his history and the history of that exhibit. And we took a crew up in July, and we spent 2 glorious days with David in his artist loft, him working and painting, him giving us the interview. It was great. And then before that, we started to reach out to a number of artists to see if they would participate. Some said yes, some said they couldn't have it on their schedule, it wouldn't work. So we ended up with the ones we have in the film, and it was important for me. It was important for me to document Faith, who's really a wonderful, phenomenal artist, an activist, a feminist, who had never really, in my sense, and from my perspective, gotten her due. So that's why I really wanted to do one on her. And then we had another gentleman who had been a part of 2 Centuries, Richard Mayu, who was in his 90s when we shot him up in outside of San Francisco. So it was a really, for me, a wonderfully fun project to do, and an ability to be able to spend time with these artists while they're working and creating and learning and seeing their process. Because, as a filmmaker, for me, one of the most important things about making a film is the process. The process of shooting, the process of gathering the material, the process of editing.
Yeah, it's like in the process, you get close to these moments and these people that are just otherwise invisible.
That's right.
And you're engaged with that material, but as well as the process, I mean, you have a career of making unknown stories known to people.
Yeah.
I mean, the film about Black art, how important and influential will that be to know that exhibit, and then all these new artists that are working, and how, you know, that'll be a difference in the way that people perceive that. The MLK film is so important that's made. It's a history that's unknown. Two Trains Running, Mr. Soul, these are all like really like important things, and way beyond the process, but they are culturally rich. And of course, Eyes on the Prize, and so much of your career has been like telling us the history that's out there, not quite in plain sight, sort of in the back of our mind, and making us understand it in a really compelling and beautiful way.
Thank you very much.
And that's really important. So before we let you go, and I promised to only have you a half an hour, tell me what you're working on now, because you told me you've got all kinds of things you're working on.
I'm finishing up a documentary about the legendary Arthur Ashe, who won the U.S. Open and the only African-American male to ever win Wimbledon in 1975 against Jimmy Connors. And I'm also finishing up a documentary on the renowned musician, composer, activist, Max Roach, whose seminal album, We Insist, Freedom Now Suite, came out in 1960 and was, you know, a revolutionary record. And is about his relationship with also Abbey Lincoln and Clifford Brown and Charlie Parker.
Two just remarkable people who just were incredibly successful, but had lives that were very important beyond just the importance of what they did, beyond the tennis and beyond the music. They were both really important and remarkable people. So I'm very excited, want to see those, you know, as soon as they're available. Sam, thank you for taking time and doing your 7th or 8th Zoom of the day. You have so much to do, and man, I would love to sit in on one of your classes one of these days.
Well, feel free. If you want, I'll send you my Zoom link for my next class.
Oh man, that would be awesome. It really would. I mean, I teach editing, but I want to see what you teach in the history of editing, because I'm sure there are things you know that I don't, that would be really great.
Probably not. I mean, you know, as an editor, I always say the most important thing is understand that editing is that final script.
Yeah.
You know, it's the final script. And it always, no matter if it's a fiction film or a non-fiction film, the editing changes the landscape of how you put that film together.
Yeah. It's got to be a soul in there that can feel the story.
That's right.
The rhythm and the structure to make it work.
Exactly.
So before we leave, Kelly, what are we doing next week? You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
So next week, we're going to have Oscar-nominated actress Candy Clark with us. So she really is, yeah, she's really excited to talk about The Man Who Fell to Earth, and the one she was nominated for an Oscar for was, of course, American Graffiti. But she's also wants to talk about the version that she was in 1988 called The Blob,
which I have not seen yet.
I haven't seen it yet either.
Candy Clark, wow.
Yeah, join us, Sam. That would be fun.
7:30 Central Time. Sam, thank you so much. It's been such an incredible pleasure. Thank you for your work, and just a major fan. And
thank you,
do all that and teach, because believe me, I know what that means. You have to go to meetings at school and all kinds of things.
It's faculty meetings, you know, committee meetings. Yep.
Indeed. But it makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank
you all for being here. We'll see you next week, and thank you so much.
Bye.